Good afternoon, Shanghai, and good morning, Switzerland. Welcome to join our Café des Sciences webinar. My name is Sisi Sun. I'm the head of art science at SwissNext China. So as usual, before we start, I will give a few words of our organization. SwissNext China is the initiative of the Swiss State Secretariat for Education, Research, and Innovation. We have 5 offices around the world, 2 in the States, 1 in India, 1 in Brazil, and us in China. For the past 11 years, we have been actively connecting the dots between China and Switzerland in science, higher education, and innovation. The webinar today is part of our Café des Sciences lecture series, which we started in 2019, and it takes place every 3rd Thursday each month. We try to present Swiss spotlight scientists, startups, artists, and designers through this platform, and also connect them with the local network. So today we've invited Alex Sadeghi as our speaker. He is an architect, designer, and design principal at Studiolite. He will share with us his observation of the design trends and the overall design scene in China through his projects and practices. And for our audience, you may use the Q&A tab to type in your questions, and we will answer the questions in the Q&A session. The webinar today will last about 1 hour, and the video recording and the presentation slides will be shared with you afterwards. So now let's welcome Alex.
Hello. Thank you, Sisi, for the introduction and for having me. Hello, everyone. Very happy to be here to show you some of our projects and work. So as Sisi mentioned, I'll be going through the current design scene and trends in China through our work with a particular focus on its integration with technology, art, and general crossover between fields. So let me share my screen. Okay. So first, maybe a bit about my background to give some context. So many years ago now, I came to mainland China to work for MAD Architects in Beijing. This kind of sparked my interest or even passion for the design scene in China. Back then, I had the opportunity and the great privilege to work on many big, iconic buildings around the country. Back then, it was very much about those kind of projects. It's changed a lot today, but it's still a very exciting place to work. So later during my graduate degree at UPFL, I continued to do a lot of work on Chinese urbanism in particular, working with digital tools to imagine futuristic cities. I've always personally been fascinated about the intersection between technology and design to this day. After graduating, I worked for 2 years in New York City on skyscrapers, which is another interest of mine. And so while I was in New York, I was already being connected to projects in China. And when they ended up becoming more real, decided to come over to Shanghai to help establish what was to become Studiolite. So Studiolite is our office, run by 3 partners, my wife, Jessie, and I, and our partner, Mr. Ling. So we've been working on a variety of projects around China, from urban design to architecture, interior design, but we've also extended our reach into exhibition and product design, which I will get into a bit later in the presentation. So we work at many scales and have a particular interest in crossover and kind of cross-pollination between fields, from design to art, technology, and business. So today I'll be showing a selection of some of our projects within the context of trends in the design scene in China in particular. I've structured this presentation into 3 kind of broad categories. Firstly, I'll be talking about what I call the online-offline dilemma, in particular with regard to commercial space. Secondly, I will get into design hybrids as a response to this dilemma, and finally dip into some of our projects which extend their reach into other fields, such as exhibition, graphics, industrial design, and then how this relates back to our spatial design work. Okay, so first, the online-offline dilemma. So when we began working in China, we mostly approached projects that we were familiar with. So that means it's the large urban scale projects, architecture, because we were from the architecture and urban design background. These projects integrated many ideas from previous research, such as ideas of re-injecting social spaces into urban contexts, breaking down the large scale of Chinese urban contexts into more manageable pieces, etc. But soon our focus kind of shifted towards smaller projects with which we could experiment a bit more, control the quality, and it kind of led to a lot of unexpected but very enriching projects that we developed. So once we started working on commercial projects in particular, we started being confronted with this so-called online-offline dilemma in different ways. So the Chinese market, especially as viewed from someone who is from outside, is very fascinating and exciting because I think mainly because of the technological literacy and integration of the users. So in my experience, China is really one of the most technologically literate places I've ever been in the general population. And this is exemplified by how strongly digital systems are integrated into everyday life. And that's something that people are very aware of, in particular our clients. And so the dilemma in short is that the evolution of society towards this digitalization is forcing kind of the reinvention of physical spaces within cities, many of which are being pushed gradually into obsolescence. This has become clear with recent events, but it's been kind of a general shift over the past several years. And it's something that people consider very carefully when they approach real world design today. So as a first example, one of our major clients early on in China was Lady M. So this is a luxury cake brand from New York City. We worked on the design of all of their first flagships in all the major cities in China, as well as a selection of other high-profile locations around the country. So Lady M is an interesting brand because their product is cakes, but their strategy is very much based around social media. Their products and stores are very carefully considered to be photogenic, cute, make the perfect kind of shareable elements for people's Instagrams, WeChat moments, etc. So this internet fame is something that's very hot in China right now. That's where the term Wang Hong comes from, right? So from the beginning with us working with Lady M, it was clear that this strategy of integrating kind of the digital social media strategy had to be integrated into our design of the physical locations. So in approaching the design of these many stores, we made sure to pay close attention to the experience from basic things like how people line up, because there are always very, very long lines to get into these places, to how the products are presented, how photogenic and visually dynamic the spaces can be through the lighting, design, and scenography. But also because of the speed at which Lady M was expanding and proliferating their stores around China, we also made sure to really design each spot as its own media event, integrating kind of narrative and local context into the design to make sure that each opening generated this buzz, amplifying the kind of internet effect. So the projects here, the one I showed previously was the store in Xintiandi in Shanghai, which took inspiration from the Art Deco movements, which is very kind of local in Shanghai. Our store here in Hangzhou is using more precious materials and kind of abstract arches, recalling a gallery by the water. Whereas the store in Shenzhen uses this kind of more sci-fi, high-tech aesthetic using complex metal geometry and perforated panels. And really each store in all the cities kind of has its own character and uniqueness to really make each one different while still staying true to the general strategy. So Lady M is just one of many brands that have been forced to consider the importance of the digital space as much, if not more, than the physical spaces in their overall strategy. Another client we've worked with that I could not mention is La Chocolaterie Blondel, which I'm sure some listening will know. It is a nearly 200-year-old chocolate brand from my hometown, so Lausanne, and they've been operating China for several years now. So in contrast to Lady M, Blondel, they've approached kind of this online-offline dilemma differently and very cleverly, I think. They put a lot of effort into their online presence, their digital spaces. So if you go to their store on Tmall, it has excellent graphics, photography, really top-notch presentation. But in terms of physical stores, rather than multiplying its locations like Lady M all over China, they really focus on opening small, very beautiful stores in the best locations at the best malls in China. So currently they only have really a few small locations, but they're really in the best places. And each one is like a little jewelry box. And it's meant to be kind of this targeted showcase to present their brand image, philosophy, and quality to support their extensive online platform. So the team that runs Blondel China is very passionate about the brand, its history. For me, obviously, it's been great to work with them on making each one of these locations into something very special that integrates the tradition of the brand, my hometown, but also with the excitement and kind of new platforms that come with working in China. So in both cases for Lady M and Blondel, this visual aspect was obviously very crucial. These days, design content has become much more available to anyone through platforms like Instagram, Pinterest, or just searching online. What that means is that people are much more exposed to the visual aesthetic parts of design and have become very sensitive to high quality design, and mainly through the lens of photography. So this has very much affected how we approach our projects. And I picked this project for a children activity center in Shenzhen called the Milan Club, which we completed earlier this year to illustrate how much time we put into the visual dynamism of spaces to make them stand out and respond to this, to what people are getting used to. So this project is a 3,000 square meter activity center that we designed as a journey through different dream landscapes, from hills and rivers to deserts, factories, the ocean, things like that. So very complex, very large scale project with over 160 different colors we had to coordinate. But the results are very kind of photogenic, dynamic, colorful, and really respond to this kind of visual literacy that people are developing through social media. On the one hand, of course, it is marketing, but really it's something that the general public has become accustomed to and also seeks out in spaces. So yeah, this was a quick introduction of those few projects, which to give an idea of more direct correlation between the integration of the online and offline spaces within the context of Chinese cities. More different shifts are happening on more of a functional level, and that's what I'll talk about now in this part of when I talk about design hybrids. So design hybrids, what does that mean? I'll explain. Another industry we have worked in, and that's been strongly affected by the general shifts, is the fashion industry. So these days, not just in China, but everywhere, it's very easy to order your clothes online, send them back, etc. In China in particular has a very, very strong infrastructure to support this kind of shipping. So more than ever, these locations have to stand out to attract people and maintain their relevance. And one big trend for these types of spaces is flexible design or hybridization. So that's integrating non-conventional functions into spaces which traditionally were served a single use or were monofunctional. So there's kind of this metamorphosis going on where these spaces are slowly changing into hybrids that mix the functions of stores, art galleries, cafes, bars, etc., which makes things a lot more complicated for us, but it's also very exciting and the opportunity to design interesting solutions. So this is a small recent project, a showroom on the Buns we did for Bu, which is a young, up-and-coming kind of Chinese fashion brand. So what they wanted was a showroom that was fully flexible, which could integrate different uses, such as, on the one hand, a store, but they also wanted it to be their office space, kind of a open co-working space, but they also wanted to use it for exhibition and events, things like that. So the solution we came up with on a more detailed level is this ceiling system with these customized metal elements, which can be slid and removed completely to kind of give these different functional possibilities to the space. So this is just a quick example of flexibility as a key aspect of this evolution in types of commercial spaces. On a larger scale, these shifts are happening on more of a programmatic level. This is a project which is under construction. It should be done sometime this year, before the end of the year. It's called We in Hangzhou. It's a multifunctional commercial space, an adaptive reuse project of an existing 3-story building in Hangzhou. It combines many, many functions: co-working space, boutique hotel, event spaces, pop-up areas, shops, bars, fitness, many, many functions within a relatively small footprint. So all these programs working together was something the client wanted from the beginning. And it was a challenge, not least of which because it was inside an existing building. So our solution was to, as you can see in the top diagram here, gut the central axis of the building, creating this very long linear atrium that rises through the 3 floors and acts as kind of the heart or spinal column of the complex. It's a fully flexible space that can be used from everything from relaxation to shopping and even shows, which can be seen from rooms on the 2nd floor facing inward. Yeah, kind of this very large, flexible space that connects all the elements like little parts of a clock to fulfill this idea of a continuously changing flexible space on many levels. And within this project, as you can see, many varied spaces, all the way down into the detail of the hotel room. We're thinking about this flexibility and designs these types of rooms, which can be converted from a standard hotel room to a kind of workspace lounge by folding the bed up and changing the furniture, or even using some of the furniture as a little seasonal boutique for local artisanal products. So those were just two examples of projects that integrate this idea of hybridization, flexibility, as a response to this requirement for more unconventional commercial spaces related to, the changes in how we live. So now I wanted to show just very quickly some projects that we've worked on that go beyond kind of purely interior architectural design and start to connect with art, industrial design, and technology. So even though we are from architecture and design background, as I mentioned, we decided to pursue these projects as a challenge to ourselves, but also a way to broaden our perspective and understand these elements which are becoming more and more prevalent in today's design world. So quickly, so first, this is a project we worked on the planning and organization and design of the spaces for an exhibition at the Riverside Art Museum in Beijing, which invited many international artists around the topic of sustainability, climate change. Some other arts crossover installations we've worked on. One was the Love Theater in Beijing, a kind of Instagram-friendly, trendy space done in collaboration with Lady M, integrated into a wider art exhibition about love. And on the right here, you can see a hybrid event / exhibition space pop-up called Fenglan that we designed based around the works of Chinese author Feng Tang. We've also been collaborating a lot with Hangzhou and Pudong airports on several products and installation design. Firstly, back in 2017, we designed this playful kind of pixelized sculpture along with graphic design to celebrate the Year of the Rooster in both airports. We also worked on iconic billboards throughout both airports. And here on the right, a more recent project was the revamp of the taxi stand at the arrivals of Pudong Airport. This integrates kind of Art Deco metal frames with hanging curved LED screens, which show kind of the history of Shanghai images so that people are entertained and distracted while they wait for their cab. And finally, just to kind of end with these kind of projects, these were some theoretical product designs we generated with Audi. So they asked us to develop these products based on their iconic kind of car headlights. So smart glasses, lamps, and interior decoration products. This was actually made as kind of a joke for April Fools in 2018. And I wanted to put this just to show again that even a brand that is international and very large like Audi is very, very sensitive to their online store, their digital spaces. Like I was saying with Blondel, for example, before, they really take the care and spend the time to make those places to express ideas and creativity. So finally, I wanted to end on one of our recently completed projects, which I think serves as kind of a synthesis for all the ideas that I've been going through briefly. So this is the OnOff Store in the Bund Finance Center in Shanghai. This is a multi-brand store. It collects and displays the works of young up-and-coming Chinese fashion designers, collects them together. So for this project, as sometimes happened, the client came and their brief was almost that they wanted everything. They wanted the space to not only be a display store for the products, but also offer spaces for art exhibition, events, flexible systems for fashion shows and seating. They wanted a reception area with a bar. They also wanted a very unique, colorful style, the integration of artworks, also technology. So really, they basically just wanted everything inside this one space. So when we approached this complex project, first of all, we broke down the complex space into different areas. A main kind of display central area with side alcoves for different functions, and the reception area at the back, and a kind of very enticing, unconventional facade. This was more of a structural solution. In terms of the design solution, visually, we worked with curves and colors to kind of give each space its own specificity while tying everything together through kind of a recognizable language. At a more detailed level, and going back to flexibility, we designed all the furniture to be, display furniture to be flexible and combinable. So you can kind of shift them around and move them, remove them completely also from the space if you want, to achieve different types of functions for the space. To fulfill the requirements they had for art and technology, we designed these special points on the facade to reflect those ideas, while still trying to keep it integrated into the overall design. So on one side of the facade on the right, you have this tunnel of LED screens, which serves as a display area, pop-up area, but also what the client calls the photo booth. So a place, of course, for people to take photos for their social media. And then on the left here, you have what's possibly one of my favorite parts, this interactive art installation, which is a giant rotated mirror ball that customers can interact with, rotate it, it reflects the outside, the inside, and kind of blurs the limits between the store and the mall beyond. So it fits into the overall geometry and design, but still stands as kind of its own sculptural piece. And here, of course, just a few images showing how people kind of use those spaces. And then here, just quickly, this is a video done by our great photographer, just to show the space in action. All the curves kind of integrating the rotating mirror ball at the entrance. All the way down to the details, kind of keeping the same language with the curves, the lighting. And the LED screens at the entrance. This is the reception bar area in the back with a view on the buns. Can be used for display as well. And then the flexible system, as I showed before. And then the rotating ball, which I love. Yeah, so yeah, I thought I would end on and off because obviously we're very proud of the results, but also because, as I mentioned, it really integrates all these techniques and ideas from what we've done before and in other fields. Yeah, so that about does it in terms of the projects. I think to end, I would say that for me, working in China, it's been very, very enriching and interesting to see also how the scope of my job has been altered. I think it's clear that design is never really about visual style, purely visual style. It always requires the integration of multiple fields for success. The difference now is more about how we approach projects and which elements we're required to overlap. In particular, technological literacy of the users, their familiarity with artistry and visual expression, the need for flexibility, and things like that. So it's been very enlightening and broadened my perspective on the possibilities of design. And with recent events, it's only kind of exacerbated questions that we deal with about physical presence, digital tools in everyday life, online, offline, digital, analog, things like that. Not just in commercial spaces, but also, of course, at home and at work. And those are things I'll be glad to discuss in the questions. In any case, I think going forward as designers, we will be increasingly required to deal with these questions. And for me, I am very excited. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex, for your very interesting presentation. I think we all had this experience with all those social media friendly buildings and stores when we go into the stores, we just can't help taking photos.
Sure.
So we see some questions are already coming in. So we'll just pick one from here. Could you recommend some resource or examples on how design thinking could be extended to virtual space? We are so swamped by virtual events nowadays. It would be great to see more well-designed virtual experience. I think this also goes back to our discussion before.
Right, right.
Yeah.
I would say there is not, even though kind of virtual, I would say digital spaces are very much present in our everyday life today, through our phones simply that we have in our hands, and how we use those apps, and how we're speaking right now through Zoom. Virtual space is still very much a thing that is not fully explored or developed yet, but there are some examples of things that are being done. We have had some clients, so these are projects that haven't been completed yet, but who have come to us and asked for online purely virtual stores for their brands. So no physical store, just an online store. Recently I saw this article about the classical Italian brand Minotti, which designed a virtual showroom. So they actually designed an entire building virtually to act as a virtual showroom for their products. I would look at that as an example, but at this point there aren't that many examples yet. I would also, if you're a designer, I'm not sure who's asking the question, but if you're a designer, I think it would be interesting for you to look at some of the technology that is being developed for us in terms of real-time rendering, particularly integration with the gaming industry, which uses very high-quality real-time visualization programs. Those things can very quickly get you familiar with virtual experience as a part of doing design, and would be and I think going forward that's going to be a very rich place to be designing.
Thank you. We also have more questions coming in.
Ooh, yes.
One is from Jolie. What's the challenge you've met during your practice in China? Difference than practice in the States, or I think it's States.
Yes.
Yeah, States. Yeah, okay.
Well, the projects I worked on were quite different. In New York, I worked a lot on residential skyscrapers. Very, in a way, kind of a niche industry where you're designing very nice apartments in very tall skyscrapers for people who can pay for them. I think that what is different, I think, in China, and not just as opposed to the United States, but perhaps even the rest of the world, is again, like how digitally and technologically literate people are, and how aware they are of design trends, and how sensitive they are to visual things. And I think this is related to one of the other questions actually that I see here, which is about social media and how it influences design. And this in turn even ties back to the question I said before, like right now, as designers, it is so easy for us to move directly from the sketch and our drawing to a space. It's almost instantaneous now, whereas before it would take hours of rendering, etc. So now you can very, very quickly, as a designer, be plunged directly into your designs. And on the same time, you have people on the other side, the end users and the clients, who are endlessly exposed to design and spaces through the availability of technology. So in China, I think this distance is much smaller, and it means that it's much more intense and more exciting, and it gives a lot more possibility for experimentation and new ideas. So that's a good thing.
Okay. But I think for the other question that Simi raised regarding the social media strategies, I think emphasize was more on the, would it influence on your,
Yes.
like your design concept?
Yeah.
Because I
Sure.
think the companies, they would require more on this social media
Yes.
strategy. But as a designer, as an architect, I think there should be some balance there, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, on the one hand, it's true. I was being very positive, saying that, oh, people see all these Instagram things and they want them, and it means that us as designers don't have to start from scratch. We know what they want. They don't always want, what's best for their design, and can be difficult because they have this backup of existing information to kind of convince them otherwise. So firstly, yes, I would say social media, especially in commercial spaces, definitely influences design. Even in the last project I showed, On and Off, where they were really talking about, we want a photo booth, and this will take a large part of the plan. So we had to integrate it and kind of find a way to integrate it. As for if it limits, I guess it could, like a lot of constraints, in design. Constraints can be both, blessing and curse, always.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very proud of the photo booth we ended up designing. It's very cool and attracts a lot of people. So it ended up being a good thing. Obviously, there are days when we wish we didn't have to deal with certain constraints, but that is true of any type of constraints put on designers, I think, not just social media.
Okay, I think this answered the question. We have another question from Thomas. How do you see the evolution of the dilemma between our life becoming more and more digital and the need of people to relate to the physical world, our need for being around nature, animals, and plants?
Yeah, so I am optimistic again. I think that evolving technology and things like that in society, it might give the impression that we're going towards post-apocalyptic cyberpunk megacity like you would see in movies. And to some extent, the traditional way we plan cities, and particularly, or we have planned big cities, particularly in China, where you have a lot of built structures, and it's like concrete jungles and all concrete and glass. It might give the impression at first that nature is kind of being set aside, with millions of people still moving into metropolitan areas. But I'm optimistic because I think that the adoption of technology, understandings about mobility, the awareness of our effect on the environment through the use of digital tools will end up having a positive effect on cities. You can already see how people are starting to understand the importance of local living, local shopping, reducing mobility, and appreciating nature inside urban spaces. And even new urban and architectural projects are very aware of these needs. So eventually, my hope, and I think it's not too unrealistic yet, is that the overall movement will lead towards future cities, intense, exciting environments, but also have access to the beauty of nature within them. Like a lot of things in life, it's about balancing.
Yeah, true. So another question is from Diego. Thank you for your interesting presentation. How often do you encounter structural or absolute conflicts with the building code in designing your multi-purpose spaces?
I think it's not. It hasn't been, in my experience, so much more challenging than working on more traditional types of spaces. Usually, it ends up being more at the level of detail. In terms of structural problems and things like that, the procedures we've gone through and things like that are not much changed, to be honest. The challenge is more kind of later on the back end.
So it's more on the when you are realizing the project, right?
Let's say, for example, the OnOff Store, which has a lot of different parts, moving parts and things like that. In terms of the structure and mechanical things like that, we really didn't do anything much different than we would with a traditional store. Even for larger projects like the actual structural and technical part of the work is not different. More of the multifunction comes from how the program is structured and how the elements work on a smaller level. So luckily, we haven't had to deal with too many problems on that front yet.
Okay. So here's another question coming from Catherine. Inspired by your designs, they are modern, clear, beauty of harmonious with functions, practical, spacious. How many years have you worked in design? Have you started design in EPFL?
So yes, I am a proud EPFL alumnus. I got my bachelor's degree and my master's degree at EPFL. I started working in 2012 was when I started working, as a designer, and continuously since then. And as I mentioned, 2 years in New York. I've done some work kind of in Switzerland, and now for almost 5 years in China.
So actually, our webinar today is also supported by the EPFL Shanghai Alumni chapter. So they have helped with the promotion of the webinar as well. So I think we have a lot of EPFL alumni attending today. So we'll continue the Q&A session. And this question is actually coming from my side. So over the past few months, many people are actually forced to stay at home due to this COVID-19 situation. So the house or the apartment or even the room has become the only space that we live and work in. So do you think such a situation will impact the space or interior design in future?
So yes. So the pandemic, in my view, has acted as a kind of accelerant to the general phenomenon that's been happening in all our societies, not just China, but the world. Today, I've been talking about the physical and digital spaces that we occupy within cities, and how they're becoming more and more intertwined at many levels. I don't see that slowing down anytime soon. Each successive generation is becoming more used to these digital tools and have grown up, with phones in their hands. So this will only continue. As for how it will impact spatial design, I think on one hand, we can look at the examples I showed in terms of flexible hotel rooms, for example, as a design response, a very direct design response to this type of question. With all these different parts of our lives becoming kind of mixed together, all these different functions, this idea of flexibility, I think, is an interesting avenue to explore in terms of that, particularly if we think about adaptive reuse in the context of sustainability. What I mean by that is, let's say you're renovating an old residential building because it's the more energy efficient way to do it rather than building a new one. How would I turn my 12, 14 square meter bedroom into something which is at once a bedroom, but also a lounge, also a workspace, also maybe a gym, also maybe a virtual room so I can go, anywhere. And so dealing with those questions within that context of reusing the spaces we already have is going to be very interesting going forward, and I think will be one avenue that will be explored.
Yeah, I think this question is also very important in, especially in East Asia, since the living space is actually quite small, right. Especially in Japan or like in Shanghai, the personal living space is very small. So the multifunction in these rooms became more and more important in future, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
And another question is also related with this pandemic. Actually, we also mentioned in this presentation already, it's about the virtual space design. So do you see any challenges like when you are dealing with these virtual space design projects?
Oddly, I think in a way, it's not really challenging, in that it kind of reduces, in a way, the distance between us as designers and the final product. As I was answering the question before, the tools that we are using today as designers, because obviously we're not using pencils anymore, and that's been many,
Sure.
many years. Now we're using computers, but we're not just using computers, we're using technology that allows us to see our designs and even walk through them within minutes. So I can design, a little store and then go into our VR room at the office, put on my headset, and then I'm standing there. So already that distance has been kind of shortened. And so then when people talk to us and are talking about, oh, you want a virtual space, can you make one? In a way, it's kind of removing parts that we have to deal with, that we don't have to deal with anymore, reducing that distance. So that is makes it easier. On the other hand, so the question will then become like, oh, how do we experience these virtual spaces? When we talk about a digital space today, what does it mean? The way I was kind of describing it today, it's more kind of abstract. It's like, oh, you can say that's Taobao in China is a digital space, right? It's like an online mall, right? That you can walk through and you can see things and pick things, right? But then I spoke about the showroom done by Minotti, which is actually a virtual space that you could wear a VR headset and actually walk through. So what I mean by that is like, oh, where is the point that it becomes acceptable for people to be in these virtual spaces? Because now everyone has a phone, right? And everyone just goes to Taobao just like this, it's completely normal, even though it may have been strange for people before who were used to going to stores. So now, will it become normal and natural for people to just have a VR room at home and be like, oh, I'm going to the shop, and put on their VR headset and then walk through a shop, and it will feel natural? For me, it would not, but the next generation, it might be. And that's something we will have to consider as designers if these virtual kind of spaces become more widespread.
Yeah, actually, I already saw some fashion show. They already started to use this virtual reality or AR, this technology to showcase their work, and they are not really taking place in a physical space.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so then it's like, oh, can we accept that? And some people might not, like especially people who are less used to technology. But I have a feeling that people will be more and more willing to accept it, the same way they've accepted being able to do everything on their phone. And that will pose very kind of interesting questions for what it means to design a space in the future.
Yeah. So here's another question from Emilia. As virtual stores are becoming more ubiquitous and most important for e-commerce, do you see blurring of the line between a virtual store designer or a web designer and a designer like yourself? Or will it be one and the same?
Yeah. Interesting question. So it ties in a bit to what we were saying. But
it's also my question, actually. I have this concern.
Already today, and since a few years, even back when I was still in school, there's been kind of this again, the distance between being a designer and a programmer is kind of shortened. A lot of architects today use programming or types of visual programming, even like coding within their designs to kind of work. And in terms of the visual and virtual spaces, as I mentioned, these are tools we're used to and that we're using. So definitely, I think there's going to be more overlap, and this kind of divide between a web designer or a programmer and a designer will become much more narrow going forward with the development of all these technologies and how people use them.
So yeah, actually, this leads also to another question about design education. So since the requirements of a designer is more and more, I mean, you need more skills now. So do you think back in the education part, what kind of knowledge or skills you need to train at an university level?
Yeah, I have I have strong opinions about this. I think a lot of architectural education is it's good and it covers the basics, and but kind of there are some lacking in terms of how people actually work in the field, because architecture is notorious for being a field that kind of follows technology trends a little slowly. These days, as I mentioned, in the architecture office, we have VR rooms, we have real-time rendering engines, we do everything on computers. We don't even print posters anymore, very rarely, things like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, the integration of these types of skills into the education is crucial, and should be done, is being done. But at the same time, there's still a lot of attachments to the past and kind of the traditional way of doing things, drawing by hand, which is of course important to know some extent for an architect, but less and less relevant. I think the evolution of technology is so fast and getting faster. There's definitely some catching up to do in terms of education, in my opinion.
So if there is a young designer seeking for advice from you, what would you say to him then?
Yeah, I would say stay open and curious, and keep your ear to the ground about all the newest kind of things happening. If you're going to school, and it's very possible you might have a professor who's telling you like, oh, you shouldn't use computer because it's more you can put more feeling if you draw by hand or something. I would say that's fine, but you should also be curious and research yourself. Oh, what are the tools people are using today? They are using parametric scripting to design buildings. They are using real-time rendering engines. They are using virtual reality. Those are all things that are very, very useful tools, and that even though they are quite new, just so valuable. So if you are a young designer, stay very curious and develop your tool set, because the more tools you know how to do, the more brushes you have in your box, the more pencils, the more possibilities you will have to take your inspiration and transform them into design.
All right. So talking about inspiration, so what is your experience and what usually gives you the most inspiration in your daily life?
So this isn't, I think it's not an easy question. I think creative people, or any people, we get inspiration from, a lot of different places, inside and outside. And it's hard to point to one specific thing. I wouldn't just be able to say like, oh, I just like art and art inspires me. I don't think that's nearly enough. One thing I would say is, more specifically, maybe while working in China, myself, I have been very inspired by the context of cities. That might be because I am from Switzerland, where everything is small and we don't have a lot of people. But the cities in China are just very, very inspiring. I love nature, and China has a lot of very beautiful scenery. But the intensity of the Chinese cities and the millions of little stories that are like inside them are just so inspiring. And stories, I think, are important part of everything we do. and cities are a great place to kind of experience them.
All right, I think we are slowly reaching our time. So for our audience, if you still have questions, you may write to us at artscience@swissnextchina.org. And I'd like to thank Alex for your wonderful presentation and this inspiring discussion.
Thank you.
And also thank to our audience to stay with us for this session. I hope we will see you again at our next event. Thank you.
Thank you.